Welcome to the Voice of Business podcast. We're back at Bennett's. Thanks to Bennett's for this beautiful showroom for doing this, and for Janice at Odigsky Media for producing this. And my guest today, we've got Andy Cragg, Executive Director of the New Canadian Centre. Thanks for joining us.
Yeah, happy to be here.
Yeah, all right. Well, maybe first up, you can tell us a little bit about your organization for those that maybe haven't interacted with you as much. What do you do, and what's New Canadian Centre about?
Sure. We are now in our 45th year. We were started by a group of volunteers in 1979. And wow, if we ever grown since then, and as the country's increasing connection to immigration has evolved, so has our centre. We're 50 staff now, and
wow.
Really the core of our mission is two prongs. One is, of course, providing services to and really trying to empower folks who are new to Canada. And the other side of that is trying to provide leadership in the community to foster a welcoming and inclusive community, so that when people who are new come here, they experience this as a great place to live, because it feels like a place they can make a home and that they belong here.
Yeah. You know, like dealing with you guys and that, it seems like this is an essential service for a community. And when I talk with my chamber colleagues and other places around Ontario, and you know, sometimes I'll get questions about, well, we've got these newcomers. How do we welcome them? What do we do here? I'm like, well, talk to your New Canadian Centre. Or what? And then you realize that this isn't something that is just, you know, you aren't a government agency. This isn't something that's just established in every community. This is something where you have to go out, seek funding. You're a completely independent, not-for-profit, and 45 years, you know, that takes a while to build up something like that. Yeah. What goes into, you know, gathering all of that together and keeping this whole thing running and providing all these services?
Yeah, I think it's something that we can all be proud of as Canadians, that our approach as a country is to support people who are new when they come, you know, and you can see in other countries there's a whole range from, like, you know, newcomers, immigrants are not welcome in a country, to more like the United States model, where you can come in, but, you know, pull yourself up by your bootstraps. In Canada, I think smart policy is that we support people who are new so that they can succeed and make the positive contributions that they make as quickly as possible for their benefit and everyone's benefit. Yeah. And, you know, New Canadian Centre, Peterborough is an example of how we put that into practice. We're fortunate that we have some funding from all levels of government, but you know, actually our second biggest source of funding is private donations.
Wow.
We rely on hundreds of community members who donate to us every year, and allows us to respond to all of the needs. And we're very proud that anyone who walks through the door, regardless of their immigration status or their particular circumstances, we will provide services. And really, you know, that's something that we're proud of and we think is important. And there are organizations like the New Canadian Centre in many communities, but because it's not a government direct service, you know, there's a unique flavor to that. And I think what we've been able to do through the New Canadian Centre and as a community effort is remarkable in a community like Peterborough that hasn't been as historically diverse, and we're seeing that change rapidly. And personally, I'm inspired by the idea of a smaller city like Peterborough being a place that is a bit of a beacon for welcoming and inclusion.
Yeah. No, and you know, you look at the stats of new Canadians when they arrive, and yeah, it takes a bit of investment up front to help people get the supports that they need, whether it's housing, language services, you know, just navigating what employment is like in Canada. But it seems like they're quick to find work or create their own job or whatever it is, right? Like this is a huge net benefit for our society just on that end.
Yeah, I mean, it's the foundation of our country, you know, and obviously recognizing the need for work around reconciliation is crucial, and we've been doing more of that as a centre. And you know, from that highest level, this is a nation of immigrants. Yeah. And even you look at the current stats, there's 25% of the population now are people who were born outside of the country. Yeah. If you layer onto that people whose parents were newcomers, like, it's a majority of Canadians. Yeah. So we really are a nation of immigrants. Yeah. Even if you yourself were born in Canada, like myself was, or you were.
I'm third generation myself, but happy.
But that connection to immigration is deep and broad in our country.
Yeah, yeah. Now, you touched a little bit about the diversity, and so I moved here in 2008, and I actually live outside the city. I'm out in Norwood, and it's interesting to see how much this region has changed, both in the city and in the small communities, whether it's Norwood or the other, you know, rural towns throughout Peterborough County, where there wasn't a lot of diversity necessarily, you know, 15 years ago or so, and now it's just so encouraging to see that grow. And I'm curious how you've seen that end of it as far as the diversifying in our community. And we'll go with that first.
Yeah, I mean, I grew up here, so I've seen it over the course of my whole life, and it's remarkable how quickly it's changing. And I think it mirrors the the story of Canada, where we've had this official policy of multiculturalism for a little over 50 years, but really we're starting to see that play out in its full complexity more recently. In the 90s, source countries for immigration really started to concretely move away from Western Europe and the United States, and now it's the whole world is coming to Canada. We see folks from 100 different countries come through our center every year. And so that actual reality of building a multicultural society and all of the complexity that entails is coming to communities across Canada. It's not just Toronto, Montreal, Vancouver anymore. It's Peterborough, it's Norwood, it's Havelock, it's Lindsay. It's a reality. And you look at the numbers, and you've heard me tell this story before, but it's 100% of the population growth is from immigration now.
It is.
If you're a business owner, like this is your customer base, this is your employee base, this is your business succession plan. It's no longer like a nice to have, feel good, it's something, a social issue I care about. This is like a core economic reality in Canadian society.
Yeah. And now it seems like a lot of newcomers are drawn to neighborhoods with similar culture, language, that kind of thing, which traditionally has been in the GTA. But are we seeing a bit of shift of that as we have a more diverse community here, that people are able to get that support here and not have to go to the big cities? Yeah,
I think there's pros and cons on that, but we experience very practically in our work and the clients we're supporting. For someone especially who's not as strong in the English language, that makes work options much more limited. Whereas in Toronto, if you were a Spanish speaker and you didn't speak English too well, you might be able to get a job with a construction crew that there's Spanish speakers and someone who speaks fluently English and they can kind of translate things, or in an ethnic restaurant, that kind of thing, or private business. In Peterborough, that's not really the reality. So not having a good enough English language ability really makes the settlement journey a lot more challenging here, particularly in terms of finding employment. And now with the positive side, I think we really see that there's a really deep and meaningful building of community that folks who are new to Canada and make their settlement in Peterborough, an area that they can experience, because there aren't those built up communities from particular countries. That's growing, and one thing we're actually fostering is various different local multicultural communities, the Bengali community, the South Indian community, and things like that are growing. But really, you're going to mix. If you're settling in Peterborough as a newcomer, you're going to mix with folks from all over the world, and you have to.
Yeah.
We have our weekly women's group, and there's women from various countries. Whereas in a more dense urban setting, you might have just meeting with women from your same country or linguistic background. And I think there's positives that go along with that, as well as the ability to connect with folks like you or I, who are established residents, and kind of the network and connections and cross-cultural learning that we throw into that mix as well, not even as immigrants.
Yeah. Now, is language one of the biggest barriers for, and I'm assuming housing is probably up there too, because everybody's struggling to find housing?
Yeah, in terms of employment, language is a key challenge. I think there's a piece that's on employers as well, in terms of adjusting expectations around both language and Canadian experience. The law has shifted in Ontario around Canadian experience, but nonetheless, that's a reality, and employers have reservations about hiring people who don't have a Canadian experience in the area of work, and that continues to be a challenge. And on the language front too, when you're talking about an employer base largely in Peterborough who's not used to working with employees who are English language learners, there's an adjustment there as well. And we've talked to both employers and employees or job searchers, and there's been some research even done around this through Fleming over the years, that the employee will say, my English is fine, I can do this job. And the employer will say, oh, their English isn't good enough to do this job.
Yeah.
And there's somewhere in the middle there. Like, I know folks who run small businesses, and they've hired successfully in a manufacturing setting folks whose English level is quite low, but they make it work because they make the Google Translate work, or they have an employee who can kind of be in the middle, or whatever it may be. And we actually have a training program that we're running at the New Canadian Centre to actually help bring in English language instruction to workplaces as well. This as another tool that employers can have. So there's, and when I talked earlier about like the reality of building a multicultural society and in smaller communities, like this is the front lines of what those particular specific challenges are.
Yeah. Yeah, I've seen some really cool tech that, like through AI, that helps for like workplace training in people's language and culture and that kind of thing. But I've also noticed new Canadians in certain jobs when they've been hired, where there's at least a basic understanding of English, but within 2 to 4 months on the job, where that's the language that they're interacting with day to day, how much that can improve, right? Like where they're at when you're hiring them isn't necessarily where they're going to be in a couple months.
Immersion in the classroom is great. But,
and so how do you find, as far as new Canadians being able to transition into the workforce in Peterborough, is it fairly easy for them to get jobs here, or what are the barriers there?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's important to kind of zoom out to the high level that the vast majority of immigrants to Canada are highly skilled, speak English or French, have post-secondary education, and kind of by definition, because of the nature of our immigration system, that's who we select in as permanent residents coming in. And there's been lots about this in the news of the number of temporary residents, and especially international students, but even, especially looking at the student population and people working while being a student or after being a student, they're also educated and have English language abilities. By definition, they wouldn't get into college and university if they didn't. But and so that's the majority, and in terms of economic success, they're finding jobs. There's definitely barriers around, again, particularly discrimination, and the network, I think, is another piece that is really challenging for newcomers to overcome. In Canadian labor market, that is so huge. Anyone listening to this has probably experienced that. Like, you get a job, sure, there's some that you get by applying, and you put your resume in and you get the job, but there's so many that it's your network, who someone get recommending you, right? And you're starting from basically ground zero when you come as a newcomer, and that's a huge challenge. For us at the New Canadian Centre, a particular cohort that we work with that it's more challenging is folks who come as refugees. Now these are folks who, Canada as a nation, to our credit, has said, come find refuge here, no expectations. Sometimes people have negative perceptions around the expectations of refugees. They're coming here and they're not working or whatever it may be. But to remind people that that wasn't the deal. It's like we're offering these folks refuge because they're fleeing persecution. They did not choose to come here. They needed somewhere safe because they're fleeing war or violence, persecution, whatever it may be. Nonetheless, refugees over time make contributions to Canadian society that is net positive. They pay back whatever the cost was economically in terms of public spending. But it's a challenge to get there. And especially when you're talking about folks who in many cases don't speak English because they hadn't planned to leave their country of origin. They maybe don't have the same post-secondary education that someone who's coming as a skilled immigrant does. That being said, there's a huge variety. We've had folks who were like chief doctors of a country or lawyers or teachers come through as refugees because they found themselves in the circumstance of having to flee. And there's also folks who don't even have a high school education and come here as refugees. And that's a longer journey, starting with the language learning, but also adapting to the culture, gaining basic life skills around numeracy, literacy, how to use technology. We're so used to things like paying a bill online, accessing an ATM, that if you're someone who's come from a country that's a cash economy and you don't have a high school education, that's a long road to hoe to get to a secure job that's covering your cost of living.
For sure. We'll expand a little bit about just how that impacts the workforce. Having hired a couple new Canadians before too, it's not just about getting enough bodies to do the job, right? Like we've talked about how our growth of our population, 100% of it is coming through immigration. It's not just that we need people. It adds some structure to the workforce to have diversity in our workplace. We add different perspectives, and I've experienced that firsthand and how much that can make our workplace stronger. What have your experiences been with that?
Yeah, I mean, of course, I'm very biased on this topic, but I think it's rich personally, and as an organization, it makes us stronger to have such diverse perspectives. It's not without challenges, when you have folks from very different backgrounds and trying to find common ground and communicate with various different accents. We have, I think last time I counted folks coming from 26 different countries as our employee base, so a large range of backgrounds. but it's interesting, and we love celebrating each other's cultures, and it's a great opportunity for engagement with employees, that they can have that platform to share, about how they prepare their tea or coffee or a particular meal from their culture, or like a religious or cultural tradition that they can share about. So it's a great opportunity as well for learning within our team, and like helping that kind of workplace culture and connection to our workplace.
Yeah.
I think as well you get connections to different pockets of Canadian society, thinking more from a business for-profit perspective, that with immigration being such a foundation in growing in Canada, that ability to connect through your employees to different perspectives can only be positive for business development. What are your products that are relevant to different parts of the Canadian society beyond just what you as maybe the business owner or whatever someone's particular role is. We all have our cultural backgrounds and biases and things that we know and are comfortable with, and others have different. And if we can kind of have a broader range of appeal, and this is like my earlier comments, like the diversity of immigrants are your employees and your customers, and being sensitive to that, I think, is only strengthened by having a diverse employee base.
Yeah. Now, when we have different crises around the world, and we have an influx of refugees, I'm thinking of Syria and Ukraine and that kind of thing. We have employers that reach out and say, I want to do something, I want to help. Like how do I get involved? Do you connect people directly to employers? Okay.
Yeah, we have employment services. The core of it for us is around kind of coaching people through the nuances of the Canadian employment market. How to, you have to have a resume, how to structure it in a way that would be familiar to Canadian employers, what to expect in an interview, how to perform well in an interview, the importance of networking and kind of putting yourself out there, informational interviews, building your network and making those contacts. So that's kind of the core of what we do. And then there's the job matching piece, where we would be actively trying to match our clients with particular job opportunities and cultivating those with employers.
All right, I got one last question for you. So, we talked about how far we've come, but at the same time, I'm sure there's a lot more we can do, both as a business community and residents of the area. What can we be doing to make our community even more welcoming to newcomers?
Well, we can support the New Canadian Centre.
All right. Donate, volunteer.
Donate today, that's right. Volunteer, yeah. We rely on more than 250 volunteers to help with the work that we do. But I think, for medium and larger organizations that have a kind of more sophisticated policy and procedures in place, looking at those and seeing how you can layer in diversity and inclusion in that, whether it's hiring practices or ability to take different stat holidays that maybe, align with different religious traditions, things like that. In recruitment, how is it that you could connect with a more diverse candidate base, for example, or make different hiring decisions to have a more diverse workforce? I think as well, participating in the community and supporting activities that bring and support kind of normalizing diversity of culture. And you see this with public institutions. I think the city of Peterborough has been great at this in their communications as well. It's kind of like highlighting different cultural backgrounds. We've collaborated with them, for example, with like Zumba or Bollywood dancing, kind of trying to mainstream different cultural backgrounds that aren't just, the Tragically Hip, which is great, like the July 1st Tragically Hip concert cover band was awesome at Cray Park, but, thinking like, okay, if we're an organization that's putting on events or concerts or public events, how can we bring kind of different food, music, dance, culture to that? And in our advertising and promotions, how can we bring different folks to the lens to center that? In leadership positions within an organization, how do we kind of walk the talk around that so that there is representation? Because that makes a difference to people to see that, and that's part of why we're able to attract and retain such a diverse employee base, is that people see that is there from our board to our senior leadership, all the way down, that representation is there, and it's a place where folks who aren't white, who are racialized or language learners, can feel like, oh, I could fit in there. Because I know, like, the flip side exists, and it's important to acknowledge that there's ongoing racism and discrimination that people experience
Yeah.
in the community, from the more extreme hate crimes, and unfortunately, it sounds like there was another one in the community just a couple days ago.
Yeah.
From violent crime to the little things like being constantly asked or complimented on, oh, your English is really good, and like that's a nice thing on the surface, but if you hear that every bloody day from all your coworkers and your boss, it's like, oh, that starts to make you feel like you don't belong. So like being attentive to those nuances and how you're kind of cultivating a space where folks who are different from yourself might feel welcome and like they belong.
All right.
Yeah.
Good answer. Thanks so much for joining me, Andy. Appreciate it.
Yeah.
All right.
Good to be here.